Welcome back, flower lovers. We are so happy to spend a little time with you today. And thank you so much for being one of our subscribers of the Flower Essence podcast. We have been really busy lately working on our Flower Essence conference, and which has just recently concluded, although it's still alive, it still lives. It is still available for everyone who is subscribed to it and who is a registered attendee. You can continue to take in the content for a full year. So that's what we've been doing and spending a lot of our time and energy doing of late. But we wanted to get together today and talk about working with our friends, the ancients. And we're talking about these ancient trees, the magnolias and the redwoods. These are some of our personal favorites. And we wanted to share a little bit more of our stories and experiences with them. That's why we're here today. So, hey, Ro, how's it going?
Hi, it's going well. Yeah, still, just enjoying the afterglow of that conference and the amazing community that it brought together. We had some incredible live sessions, and all of those are recorded and still available, like you said. But it was just a really beautiful experience. I'm still kind of in awe of how it all came together and how wonderful it was.
It really was. It was so sweet to bring in all of these teachers from all over the world, people who have these different streams of flower essences and flower essence therapy, different theories and different concepts. Flower essences is a world that tends to be so kind of apart, where we're all kind of doing our thing. And one of your and my goals for this podcast was to bring people together. And I think we did that as well with the conference project, was bringing in all of these streams of wisdom. And so that was kind of the really fun thing for me, was seeing everybody's take on it. Everybody's got an interesting perspective. And I learned so much, as we were working with the speakers and recording all of the lectures ahead of time. I had so many aha moments. I'm sure you did too.
Yeah, absolutely. And to bring all those people together in one place, it was and to get all of the different viewpoints and the benefit of the experience. I mean, the sheer amount of experience, was really amazing. People that, I had admired for a long time but had never met, and people that I hadn't known much about and got to learn more about. So yeah, we really it was a really amazing experience. And so I really, for the listeners of the podcast, it's all stuff that's right up our alley. It's all the things that we've been talking about on the podcast, and the just going so much deeper into it. So it's really this natural progression, I think.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of pieces that I think, like tie into things that maybe we may have talked about before on the podcast, but take it a step farther. So yeah, I'm very grateful to be a part of this, to be able to do this podcast, and to be able to have done the conference.
Yeah, so much. And stay tuned, folks, because there is so much more to come. I know that we're gonna at the end of this pod today, we're gonna be talking a little bit about what our plans are. Additionally, for the podcast, we're gonna have some great guests coming up. And then also just our plans as to the conference and as things go forward. So hang in there. But let's dive into our topic, talking about the ancients. I know you and I have both been talking about wanting to have this conversation about our friends. Do you want to say hi to your redwood friends first before we start?
Yeah, I live in this coastal forest of near the coast of California, and that is the place where redwoods grow. Redwoods grow on this very narrow strip of coastal, near the coast, from about central California up to southern Oregon. And in the past, they covered a much larger area of land, and they've been around for so long. And I'd love to get into that with you, like the age of these trees, because they both the magnolia and the redwoods are ancient, and I love both of those trees, but I happen to work and live with the redwoods, and then you happen to work with all these magnolias. So it's just going to be exciting to kind of compare notes, I think, on some of the, their signatures and how long they've been around. But I do have friends that I like to say hi to every day, and when I take my little walks, and they continue to give me courage and inspiration and messages for living in these challenging times, because they really have that aura of resilience and of being able to have perspective and that long view. So I really appreciate them, and whenever I consider living somewhere else potentially, I'm like, God, I can't leave the redwoods. I'm too connected. It would break my heart to have to live in a place where I couldn't visit a redwood.
Yeah, that is a deep soul connection that you feel with the redwoods, and I certainly have experienced that also. I find them whenever I'm in their presence, and if I can find myself in the presence of an old grove, you feel like you're in sacred space. It absolutely feels like a temple to me, to be in and amongst that presence. You're in the presence of something immeasurably old and wise, and just that energy just permeates your whole being. And yeah, the redwoods are extraordinary trees, and I think anybody can recognize that wherever they land on the sensitivity scale, they can definitely recognize, like, hey, there's something here. This is something important to be paying attention to. And I know that my ancient friends, the Magnolias, are coming from a time frame 100 million years old. And in that time, if you look at it in geological time, the continents were different. The Just the whole world looked very, very different. The climate was different. The sea levels were different. Everything was very, very different. And their natural range was way wide. They were all over the world. And I think redwoods had a little bit of that too. Do you know that time frame and experience of the redwoods?
Yeah, I don't know the exact ancient redwoods. I do know that they have found fossil records going back 200 million years, which is just so mind-blowing. Um, and those fossil imprints, the of the needles and the seeds are really similar to how they look today. So they aren't hugely different, supposedly. And they did cover, I think, definitely a large swath of North America, of that of well, this was before there was North America, so a large swath of the continents that were together here. And the some say that it might even be as old as 240 million years. So it's and their name, semper verens, it means ever living. So that it's just a very ancient tree that also lives a really, really long time. It can live into the thousands of years. So I've seen some of those that old, and it's just really, uh, it kind of takes your breath away to think that this tree has been on the planet for 2,000 years. It's like, what is your, even do with that information, to think about that, how old that tree, how much it's seen on this planet. And the redwoods, they've almost been wiped out, at one point. There's actually been conservation efforts for the redwoods, for over 100 years. they became very popular with logging, with the logging industry. And if it wasn't for these conservation groups, the Save the Redwoods conservation group has been around over 100 years now, and there were other people involved in this. We probably wouldn't have any more coast redwoods now, and the giant sequoias. So there's two
Mhm.
types of redwood. There's the coastal redwood, and then there's the Sierra redwood that is the widest the widest tree in the world, the biggest around, and the coastal redwood is the tallest tree in the world.
They remind me when you're talking about that conservation issue, it reminds me of the whales. It's the same, it was that same time frame when the extractive nearly destroyed the whale populations, and that people cared and wanted to help save them. And so they were preserved. The whales and the redwoods were both preserved, and they bring forth this wisdom. It's quite interesting. Yeah, the magnolias are 100 million years old. So, they're the younger younger brother and sister to the redwoods. And they are among the very first flowering plants on the planet. Obviously, redwoods are part of the conifer family, and they don't have flowers per se. They don't have that sort of a reproductive capacity. And the magnolias were the very first in that trench of the very first flowering plants. This new idea that manifested on the planet of flowers and of that interactivity with the plant with the animal kingdom in insects, because mostly I believe that um, conifers are usually, wind transfer of pollen, or a sort of a more, elemental kind of reproductive capacity. And the great idea that is flower is an interaction with the animal kingdom. So the magnolias were pollinated by beetles because there were no bees back then. There were only beetles. Well, there were probably other types of insects, but bees had not yet come around. So the magnolias are pollinated by beetles, and they're the way that the flowers grow when the female parts are receptive, the flower is closed, and the beetle has to sort of wiggle through the petals, these very strong, well, sepals technically, these very sturdy petals, in order to wiggle around in there and distribute pollen that they've picked up from another magnolia flower along the way, in order to create that pollination. And by the time the flower is open, only the pollen is available and it is already pollinated. So they don't self pollinate. They need to be pollinated by a beetle. So it's quite interesting, this interrelationship that was created with the animal kingdom, um, because it was a really long time before we humans came along. We're, modern humans, like 50,000 years, something along those lines. So it's quite an extraordinary period of time when there was this relationship, when the plant kingdom developed these flowers, created this idea of the flower, and brought in that concept. And part of that concept is a partnership with the animal kingdom.
And so, how did you get involved? I know that with the Flora of Asia line, you have, I think, about five magnolias that you work with. There's quite a handful. Um, and, I didn't know until recent years how many just varieties of there actually are. So I know that you work with that plant family a lot, and then you've made essences. So how did you get started with that?
Yeah, the magnolias are they are much broader, as far as many more species than the ones that we often know, in the United States, where we tend to be somewhat familiar with the southern magnolia, which is part of the remnant population from when magnolias covered the earth in that era, back before all the climate changes and the ice ages and the glaciations, which kind of scoured the planet, or the northern hemisphere for sure, clear of plant life. And so the very southeastern section of the United States, current United States, was protected from those glaciers. And so there are remnant populations of magnolias, particularly that southern magnolia, in the southeast, and then also in the northeast section of South America have remnant populations of magnolias. And one of the other places where the magnolias and where plant life in general survived through the ice ages was in China, because of the presence of the mountain ranges there, which were largely east west rather than north south. And this mountain range stopped essentially stopped the glaciers from coming over, and so protected these little pockets. And so that's one of the reasons why China has such an extraordinary diversity of botanically speaking, and also why these magnolias have been growing there uninterrupted for 100 million years, and have all these different species that are available. And so I began to study the magnolias through a relationship that I developed with a botanical garden here in Sonoma County, from where these plants were growing, where the mission of the garden had been to preserve and educate people on growing or on these incredibly endangered plants, because obviously current day China things are a little different, and there are some definite pressures on the plants and the people, and there had been botanical expeditions to collect seeds, to be brought back to grow here in California, among other botanical institutions around the world. So these plants were growing in this wonderful little location, and preserved and cared for. And so I've had the opportunity to create these essences from these plants, which were directly wild source, and to be able to connect to the wisdom of the magnolias in this way and be able to share these essences. So that was the origination. And these magnolias are just, when I first started working with them, I mean, I was always bewitched by magnolias because they're such cool plants. And my background in horticulture, they're very important in design. We use magnolias in gardens a lot because they're so wonderful. But to be able to meet these wild ones was it's really a pleasure and a treat.
That's so interesting what you're saying about how it survived the ice age with it being in that area. And the the redwoods, they love the coastal part of California and thrive there because of the fog. So like that environmental piece of it is really crucial for their survival. And the fog that's happening when the cool air from the Pacific Ocean is hitting the warm air of the continent, and that's creating that coastal fog that the redwoods just drink up. And part of why these trees are so resilient is that they absorb water from every part of their tree. They absorb it through the needles, they absorb it through the bark, they, of course, absorb it through the roots. They create these little ecosystems where the drops coming down, the needles will collect the like water, and drops will come down and feed the roots, drip onto the ground and feed the roots. So it's pretty amazing to see them in when it's wet out, because I don't know, just energetically, I can feel like it's just so they're being so fresh. I feel refreshed by being there.
And isn't it so interesting? I was bringing in that concept of the interactivity of the plant and animal kingdom, but in the redwoods, I know I was listening to a podcast not too long ago about they were talking about the Doug firs in the Pacific Northwest, and how there's been studies of they can get up in the canopy and discover these incredible ecosystems that these trees create. And have you seen some of the research on on the magnolias, on the redwoods, with, I mean, there's actual soil up there, and there's plants growing in there, and there's actually animals in there too, up in the trees, hundreds of feet
Yeah.
up.
I mean, I've seen pictures and read some articles, and like National Geographic did a huge piece some years ago where they did a whole project for like measuring the tallest one of the tallest redwood trees, and they had a centerfold type picture that you had to fold out and fold out and fold out like 5 times for the length of that tree, because it, it was just so tall. And so they definitely found the ecosystems and the other things growing at the top of it.
I like that image. Isn't that like the plant geek moment? The
It's
centerfold.
total
Ooh.
plant geek moment, exactly.
But it was
Plant porn.
exactly plant porn. There you go. Don't call them hortisexuals for nothing. But the just the whole premise of how these trees create ecosystems, and not just, we're so anthropocentric. I can't say it now. Human centric. Okay, here we go with that. Where we see the world from the position of our eyes, and we walk through the groves and we're like, wow, look at these trees, but if we're actually up in the trees, if we actually can change our perspective, change our view, we see things that we didn't know were there. And so if we can get up in those trees, we realize, oh my gosh, it's this vast, vibrant ecosystem, but it's up in the air. Who knew, right?
Totally. And the other part is the ecosystem below our feet. And with redwoods especially, I don't know how the magnolias are, but the roots of the redwood, they are very shallow. They don't go very deep. They go far. They go horizontally out to connect with the rest of their redwood family that they grow around, and to search for water too, because they do need to have a certain amount of water to survive. And it's, of course, the drought and the climate change is not good. Um, but they create this mycorrhizal, network that is really amazing. There's plants that will grow there's a rare orchid that likes to grow around here, beneath the redwoods. And um, and you couldn't just transplant, this is probably true with most orchids, but you couldn't just transplant an orchid. You have to have the mycorrhizal network of soil with it. And so, the redwoods do have some of the plants that love to grow in those particular places where they are. And the they feed each other with, when one plant in the group, this is why the signature of community is so strong with redwood, because if not only do they like to grow in a circle, which is so interesting, these fairy rings, and as they're called, if one plant is starting to die, it will send its nutrients to a younger plant that's growing, and they support each other, and the same root system will exist much longer than that particular tree. So really, I mean, how I don't even know how old the root system of a redwood could grow, because it's kind of like this never-ending process that's been here as new generations of trees come up and old generations of trees go away.
Isn't that interesting though, that community aspect where every tree is cared for. Every every other animal and plant within that community is also protected and nourished. And I love that this redwood creates, it's an ecosystem creator and nurturer, right? It takes care of itself. It supports the young, it supports the old, but it also supports others within It's quite interesting how we're learning so much more about these trees. That's telling us these ancient sources of wisdom were true, that nature is not a competitive, zero sum game. It is a additive together, all of us together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I recently discovered something really interesting about redwoods, and that is their genome. They've done full genome sequencing of a handful of trees now, Um, but it's been a huge project because some of these trees have, they're like the genome is 10 times larger than the human genome. And they didn't have the tools. They didn't have the way to do that kind of sequencing only until the last couple of they're starting to sequence some of the trees, and they did the coast redwood, and it is 9 times larger than the human genome, and it's among the most complex. So there's hundreds of gene families within that are unique just to that tree. Like the human beings have 2 sets of chromosomes. Redwoods have and then they talk about base pairs of DNA where humans have 3 billion and 26 billion, over 26 billion. And it's kind of mind blowing to think that, because we always talk about flower essences and plants working on this multidimensional level. And I like looking at that, geeky science data, though, totally makes me feel like, well, there's the other dimensions, right? Those are representing these dimensions that, humans don't have. And is that part of their, their multidimensional makeup that makes them so different? And what wisdom and knowledge is stored in there? That's kind of mind blowing. I still, like head exploding, mind blowing to think of. I feel like it makes so much sense when I'm with a redwood and how I feel around it, because it just has this immensity that isn't, I mean, it, of course it's the size, but, I've had some really interesting experiences with young second growth redwoods. They don't all have to be um, the old growth giant redwoods that that you see in the centerfold pictures. But, there's plenty of young redwoods that you can connect with that, when I do, I feel connected into that kind of that community and that energy of their ancient wisdom.
Isn't it, for me, I think of it as like a planetary patrimony. It's we've got this gift that's part of the earth, because if you think about things in the time scales that these ancient plants are existing in, they think in, we think in the term of, 100 years is like, that's a really long time, right? It's like longer than our lifespan and longer than most anybody we know. But their perspective is a little different. It's a little bit longer scale. And for me, one of the interesting things is to think about, in the time that they've been here on the earth, they've seen tons of changes, but they've also lived in lots of places. And so this concept of like, where is something native to? It's like, well, when are we talking about something being native to? There was this really, wonderfully uh, Anglo-centric notion that the minute that the English explorers arrived and started classifying things in the Victorian era, that's when time began. That's when we like locked it down, like, yep, this is where this belongs. But, plants have been moving around a lot. And the world has changed a lot over the millennia. And so anywhere you live, it probably was maybe native to where, maybe redwoods were there too. Maybe magnolias were there too. So there's this quality of being able to connect in on this Gaia level, this planetary level, even if you've never actually met these plants in real life or live among them in real life. You can connect to them because they know who you are. You walk on the earth with them where they used to walk. There's a resonance. Do you think, like an echo?
Yeah, especially with the redwood, because I feel like connected to, it has this vertical energy that just connects straight down into the earth. And so even though I talked about the roots being more horizontal, it's energetically so it just kind of goes so deep in there, and that's part of the feeling of connected and groundedness. As when I first started working with redwood, I I did a journey with it, and I asked the redwood, or I asked Gaia, to help connect me to the redwood. And then what happened was completely the opposite. All of a sudden, I felt pulled down by the redwood down into the center of the earth to kind of meet Gaia to be, and Gaia being, the representative of the planet. So I, I to the size of the planet, and we were like sisters. And I had this whole experience of that Gaia was my sister, and we came here together to, help help things out, help things happen on this planet. And um and so I mean, I had no idea, of course, where this is where the journey was headed with redwoods, but it was such an immediate vertical energy of pulling me down to meet the spirit, and to meet Gaia on that level. It was quite amazing, and that's really kind of what got me um so enthusiastic, and spurred my work with redwoods on after that, instead of basically taking them for granted, which I probably had done most of my life growing up here in Northern California.
And so there's this incarnational quality of bringing your consciousness here onto the planet, which there's a very similar quality that when I first started working with the magnolias and starting to compare different species, and I found that there was this overarching premise in the magnolia family, at least from the essence level of my experience, of helping you come into form, helping your consciousness arrive onto the planet into form. And that's it's kind of quite interesting because they really are that those first flowers. And with the whole premise of flower essences, it's this vibrational quality of helping your body and soul and spirit be in more alignment. And this essence of magnolia, really, they really do help with this incarnational experience of helping you come all the way in, helping your spirit come all the way into your body so that you can be here and do what it is you came here to do. I was connecting with the elegantly named Hope of Spring Magnolia. And there's I want to just read a little piece from my attunement just because I was looking at it and I was like, oh, yeah, that's really interesting. It said, there can be no healing until the spirit finds comfort and home in the body. Either you are in or you are not in. The partway through the doorway experience is really more out than in, and that a full commitment to the incarnational experience is essential to making the body work. And I think that there's something really important in flower essence therapy and in, specifically the magnolias, in helping us to be fully into our body, be fully present with the experience. Does the redwood help speak to that as well?
Well, I just want to say I love the magnolias, and the aspect of that of embodiment. It's so strong of an energy with that, and the beautiful flowers. I mean, I've always been in love with the magnolia flower. It's just always kind of called to me. And the there's another piece of it, which is with becoming embodied, then kind of fulfilling your your role, your task, your destiny, whatever you want to call it, but um fulfilling yourself, like being yourself, and becoming your meant. And so I just appreciate what you just read, because that's so really profound. I mean, it really is. It's just like a simple profound truth. that I'm, so happy that the magnolias are helping to give us that stem. And with the redwoods, I feel like the there's a slight difference. I mean, they about becoming part of our community, and the more recent message, but we have to be here in order to do that. And and it and the messages recently especially have been around um the the community right near you, right around you. Like, they tell me about the community at my feet, referring to the network and and it translates to me to, for example, being here in this small forest town, and um learning, getting to know your neighbors and developing that community of who is around you most immediately. Because when it comes to basically survival, that's that's what we need. That's what human to differences and just come together on that kind of basic level where humans were in place need to work together. We need to work together to solve the issues of our time, to solve the issues of the planet and the climate and everything that's happening. And it's great to have these like extended virtual communities. We talked about the community of the flower essence people coming together for the conference, which is amazingly beautiful, but we also need the community around us, and that's the more practical piece of it. And I think that redwoods help with that practicality. They have that energy of practicality. They're so resilient. There's so many pieces of their plant signature that you can look at that speaks over and over again to how resilient they are, how they use their resources, that they've evolved to use their resources to get water through all of the needles and their roots, and how they funnel resources to who needs it most. It's like this tight community that is constantly working to help each other. So I think that what it's telling us about being here and being embodied is that we need to do that, but we can't do it alone. And so reach out and work around you.
That's so important because it's that whole, thinking globally but acting locally thing. It's kind of the origin of that idea, is in the wisdom that we get from these ancient trees. Is helping us to live where we are, in this place where we are. And one thing that I want to bring in from the magnolia, the Yulan Magnolia, is that quality of hopefulness, that levity of breath, of because sometimes we get so, the world seems so dense and so heavy and like, oh, how am I going to go on? And the Yulan gives us this experience of hope, of like, you're taking in that deep breath, being inspired, bringing in that air element in, and to enliven ourselves, enliven our bodies, and to go, this is what I can do. I can do this. I can engage on this level. And I think that's one of the pieces that the Yulan wants to bring into this conversation, of helping us to find a place to engage and to find some energy and some hopefulness to engage.
And yeah, I love the Yulan. It's, I think, maybe one of my favorites of yours. Um, but it's hard to decide. You can't pick a favorite, right?
You don't have
They're
to,
so
it's fine.
beautiful. They're so beautiful. And it's funny the breath, because the trees really help us breathe on this planet by the way that they absorb carbon dioxide and emit oxygen. And redwoods, because of their size, um, they do it so much, they absorb carbon. I think it's like um at a rate of 250 more times more than a regular tree. So they're so important for us on the planet to continue to breathe and to have this air and to purify the air, to have this atmosphere. And I feel like that's, when you go into a redwood forest and you smell that kind of lemony, piney scent of needles, especially if it has just rained, it's got this cleansing energy, and it feels very cleansing. and and part of that is, taking that deep breath and feeling that that feeling of, like, after it's just rained. If there's part of that with just being under a redwood, and it's hard to describe. I'm not getting the words for it, but purification, I think, is part of that concept, and part of how the redwoods help purify, um purify you and purify your energy. And there even is a type of redwood, an albino redwood, that they've seen and shown that it actually removes heavy metals from the soil. So I've actually never met an albino redwood yet, but they do exist, and it's really fascinating. It's like, wow, this is like a new role on the planet for them, like sequestering those heavy metals.
Intriguing. That's such an interesting idea. And I do love that quality of that purification of that. But so much of nature is like that too. It's like when we're out in presence with nature, in amongst the trees, in and amongst living plant family, they do help us let go of things. They do help us discharge energies. So I think that that is a really good thing to remember, that we think a lot of times we tend to think, oh, I need to go out and get some supplement, or I need to go out and get, do this thing. It's like, no, you can just go outside. You can just be amongst the plants. I think that so much of this current interest in houseplants is because is this draw to being around living things. They make us feel better. They make us feel whole again. They help us remember who we are. And the ancients are really especially good at this, I think. So I'm really glad that we had a little time to talk about our good friends, these ancient trees, the redwoods and the magnolias. So thanks for being part of this. I'm really glad we had this chat today.
Yeah, that's a great place to wrap it up. The 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 wisdom that we both feel from these ancient trees, it's really special. And um I hope that people listening, if you haven't connected to a tree, any tree, um to do so. It's actually, like, scientifically proven now that forest bathing has health benefits. So it's a thing. It's a real thing.
Yes, don't let the don't let the haters stop you from hugging trees, please. Get out there and be with the trees. So thank you so much. I'm really glad that we did this. And I also just want to thank so much to our listeners and to especially our patrons. We are really, really grateful for your help and support and community in helping us keep this podcast going. It was our inspiration and mission to start this. And it really takes a community. And we're really grateful for all of you, our Redwood patrons in our circle, who help support us and who help funnel nutrients to us to help us keep going. So thank you very much. We're really grateful. And on return, we are really grateful to send you nutrients in forms of perks. So we encourage you to check out our Patreon and see what is available, and just really appreciate you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And we have guests coming up that are going to be on the podcast to be excited about. We've got Lindsay Fauntleroy, who gave an amazing presentation at the Flower Essence Conference, and she'll be a guest coming up on the podcast, as well as Sarah Artemisia, who is the host of the Plant Spirit Herbalism Summit and her Plant Spirit podcast. So we're really looking forward to having them on the podcast and other guests to be announced
Yeah.
later.
It's so cool. We've got so much to come. We've got so many little seedlings that are starting to germinate and to grow. And we thank you for being on this journey with us. And we thank you for listening. And we thank you for showing up for us. And we really appreciate your presence, even though we can't see you or hear you. We know you're there. And so we just give you big leafy hugs and appreciate your help and helping us to share the podcast. I'm sure that you can think of at least one person in your circle of community who might enjoy this particular conversation. So we welcome you and challenge you maybe to drop a seedling their way and share the podcast with them and help them discover this like you did. So thank you very much.
Bye bye now.